you cannot reach good SRHR if not everyone is involved.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Hello Future Speaking, a safe space where we have candid conversations about issues that affect young people. Now, just once again, I want to shout out to the Youth Advisory Committee, an amazing team of 10 young people that were instituted by the Dutch National Youth Council and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands to just, create a committee where we have safe conversations and advise on policies that really affect, the well-being of young people. And I think this is really, really, really important and very timely. My name is Daisy, and I'm going to be your host for today. And with me, I have two amazing young people, but also very good friends of mine. Hey, guys.
Hey.
Welcome.
It's so good to be here.
Is it? Are you excited?
Of course. Talking about SRHR is it's the most exciting thing to do in the world, right?
Also because it has a little bit to do with sex. Does it?
Yeah.
I mean, I mostly focus on the health part, but
I'm super excited to, hear from you and just hear your perspectives on this topic. And, SRHR, like you said, Kevin, is really a broad concept, sexual and reproductive health and rights, really long, yeah? And we want to just break it down for the young people to be able to understand, but also for anyone who is really new to the entire concept. And I think for me, it's really related to, a way of life, a fundamental part of who we are, how we express ourselves, how do we interact within society, how does behavior itself interact with society. But at the same time, it relates a lot with us being able to, live healthy lives. Being able to stand up for ourselves and know our rights in terms of what we need when it comes to, our sexuality, when it comes to reproduction, two very important aspects that really define who we are in life. So I just want us to dive a little bit into, why is this really important? Why is it important for us to have conversations on sexual reproductive health and rights? And I'm looking at you, Rawan, like you want to tell the world. So tell us, what do you think?
Yeah, I think SRHR, or sexual and reproductive health and rights, is one of the most important topics that we should discuss, especially when it comes to marginalized groups such as women, girls, and even young people. I think truly empowering people goes hand in hand with people exactly knowing and realizing that SRHR is part of how they can go out of their private sphere to the public sphere, how they can fulfill the potentials that they have, how can they lead the life that they dream of. And that does not really come without thinking of SRHR and how we can take it along in every aspect, in every conversation that we have. And in every work that we do, we always see the impact that SRHR can have on this specific topic. So I think SRHR is quite the broad concept, and it's overarching in many of the work that we do. Regardless, we can always see how SRHR has a specific focus and how it has this tiny impact that leads to a butterfly effect that is often overlooked and trivialized, but it is very crucial for a full empowerment and truly making people feel like they can take a hold of their life and control it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's funny how people usually want to isolate the topic, but really it cuts across when you look into, different sectors or different important topics, and I say that in quotes, that people tend to, put up there, and not knowing you can't do all that if you're not healthy, or if you don't know your right to say no to, say, for example, to an early marriage, or to stand up for yourself and say no to this person who wants to violate you in any kind of way. But very interesting that you mentioned young people and, marginalized groups and issues to do with diversity. Do you think, Kevin, that diversity is really taken into consideration when it comes to ensuring that, services and information are readily available for everyone?
Of course, I think it's not, but of course, I think it should be, because diversity and inclusion, it's such a big topic, and when we look at all the contexts in the world, every country has its own context, every community has its own context. But I think if we look at the average community, the average country, we see that, sexuality and diversity within that sexuality is just not taken into account at all. And that's a huge issue because, you see you see these people just not getting the education they need, not getting the help they need. And that, of course, has a lot of effects on these communities and making them just not safe communities to be in. And I think the entire world, and especially the local communities, should have to take a step towards making sure that this inclusion is being taken into account, because because it's not only about women, it's not only about girls. Of course it is, but it's also about everyone else. I think most people usually focus on women when talking about SRHR, which is, of course, very important. But we also should not forget that SRHR involves everyone on the planet, and not just marginalized communities, which, of course, we should focus on. But we're never going to reach a point where the entire communities are safe and healthy if we don't look at everyone, especially looking at inclusion and diversity.
Yeah, I agree. I think inclusion and diversity does stand out as, one of the key priority areas when we're speaking about sexual and reproductive health and rights. And I think this opens up the discussion to let's look at a little bit more of what other priority areas. For example, Rowan, in Sudan, what's one of those things that really stands out as really important and that we should prioritize when it comes to this topic?
I think this is such a good and a hard question at the same time, because when we look at developing countries in general and trying to pinpoint like a singular issue, it's just hard, because as we mentioned before, SRHR is quite overarching and they are interlinked together. So it would be very hard to just choose one topic and that we think is the issue. But what I would say, and it's a topic that I keep thinking of lately, is how menstrual hygiene management is such a huge issue, and it has an increasing demand lately, especially after a study has been published about how a lot of girls just drop out of schools because they lack the knowledge, they lack the access to the products on MHM. And as I mentioned before, SRHR is all about empowering people to go from the private sphere to the public sphere. And I think that's one of the really the arcing points of how just basic lack of access to knowledge can bring people back 10 steps away from that very crucial right of them accessing knowledge, of them accessing information, of them accessing just basic services and basic products. So for me, I would say that definitely MHM and just access to knowledge overall is a huge problem in Sudan.
Yeah, I hear you. And when you say MHM, of course, menstrual hygiene management, I think a little bit lately, the conversation is also focused a little bit on the WASH, water, sanitation and hygiene, and how it's very important to ensure that there are facilities that can actually make the entire menstruation process easier for
and dignified
exactly, and dignified as well. So I hear you when you talk about menstrual hygiene management. You spoke a little bit about information as well, and I wanted us to dive a little bit into that. Kevin, so I'd like to hear more from you when it comes to, do you think that there is enough information, say for example, for young people out there when it comes to issues to do with menstruation? Do they know how the process actually works? Do they know that they even have a right, say for example, that is called a sexual and reproductive health and right? Or do you think we can do better?
No, we can always do better. But something that really breaks my heart when I talk to communities is that most young women learn about menstruation when they first start bleeding. And they're so surprised they don't have any information because they simply do not get the information, and that's a huge issue, And it's not only rural communities, which you would expect, but it's also the urban areas. And so everyone can be affected by this, because it's just, we have to do better in terms of informing young girls on menstruation, and also about how they can continue living with it. Because when we look at some communities within the context of the countries I work in personally, we see that girls simply do not go to school when they're menstruating because they don't have the resources available to continue going to school while on menstruation. I think that's a huge thing that we simply have to do better. And if we don't, then we're simply going to leave these girls behind. And that's something we simply cannot do.
Yeah, I like how you keep emphasizing leave no one behind. And of course, now we're looking at, everything for everyone, but at the end of the day, moving sustainably with everyone, And I think it's very important to highlight that. But I think beyond also menstrual hygiene management, generally services should really be accessible to everyone, like you said, in general. And that means that we also have to like sort of revise how we're giving services to young people. I mean, they should be affordable, they should be available, they should be equitable, and leave no one behind, like you said, include each and every other person and make sure that they can be able to, you know, have a service that really fits into their needs and that speaks to what they actually feel is really important to them. And Rawan, I see we're now tweaking it a little and shifting the conversation to, you know, speaking about youth friendliness and the aspect of making sure that services actually speak to young people. But Kevin just highlighted that young people don't have this information. And one of the ways that we're trying to ensure that young people have information is through comprehensive sexuality education. Yeah, and it's a very tricky topic in most countries, yeah. But I just wanted you to paint a picture of, say, for example, what's happening in Sudan, but also in Africa in general when it comes to CSE, comprehensive sexuality education.
Yeah, I think CSE is quite the taboo topic, and it breaks my heart to say that even, I think in majority of African countries, we don't really have a curriculum, of a CSE curriculum at all. In schools, and I think people know about their bodies and the changes that they go through as they are going through it, and they access information basically on the internet or just words going around between friends who probably watched a porn video on Pornhub or that video circling Facebook, which is quite faulty. And I think that's how young people are now accessing their information due to the lack of proper information that is also youth friendly, so they can digest it and understand what's happening with their body, how can they react. So I think lack of access to comprehensive sexuality education, and even sometimes even the countries that do provide sexuality education, I wouldn't call it quite comprehensive, would I?
Yeah
it does lack a bit on how we look at sexuality as a whole and the reproductive part and the sexual part of it. So I think access to knowledge and youth-friendly knowledge, I would highlight, is quite the issue when it comes to SRHR. We cannot talk about SRHR without really mentioning how young people are accessing those kind of information. What hinders it, and what challenges do they face on daily basis just to know about basic problems and basic issues that they go through.
Yeah, and might I add, it's like so insane how people really feel like the information that we speak about in CSE is really about, you know, you're going to go tell people how to have sex. I mean, how do you tell people how to have sex, guys? I don't even think it's possible.
Exactly.
It's insane. And I think, you know, so many myths and misconceptions that really surround that entire topic as a whole is really deviating us from the purpose, so that what we hope to achieve, I should say, with ensuring that information is comprehensive, just as you put it, which is really, really, really important. And we're lacking that component, which I think we have the right people here to, you know, tell us how we can now shift the conversation and, you know, move it in the right direction. And Kevin, I'm curious about your thoughts. What do you think we can do better? What do you think we can do better when it comes to ensuring that say, for example, comprehensive sexuality education is comprehensive in nature, but also to make people more accepting of it as a topic or a priority area?
That's a really good question. I think, you know, of course, as I said before, I think it depends on the specific context where you're working in. But I think the thing we have to look at is that, you know, inclusion always has to come at the forefront, you know, because you cannot have something be comprehensive if it does not include everyone. You know, that would not be comprehensive at all. So I think one of the first steps, and I, you know, as an LGBTQIA activist myself, I always say that, you know, we have to have the queer community be involved in these things to make it comprehensive. So I think if we want to educate people on how about CSE, we have to also educate the queer community about their own CSE, you know, also focusing on the trans people, the bisexual people, the gay people, and, you know, just making sure that they also have the education, because, you know, as I said before, we cannot leave anyone behind. And of course, it's not comprehensive if we do not make sure everyone is educated.
I hear you.
Rowan,
sure.
Also add one point. That's a very interesting point that he just brought up. And it actually reminded me of the work that we did, Daisy. I think we did have a lot of conversation on the YAC level about how we can also involve men and LGBTQ, how we can address sexual diversity and gender diversity when talking about comprehensive sexuality education? How can we not make people feel excluded? Because I think that's quite the thing where we're working. When we talk about SRHR, and they'll be like, yeah, girls issue, right? And we were like, no.
It's more than that, yeah.
It is men's issues too. It is everyone's issues.
For sure.
So yeah, I think we do have a question about how we can make this knowledge more accessible to people.
Yeah.
How can we make people feel more empowered to ask those questions and know more?
Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, exactly. I always say, health is education and education is health. They go hand in hand, and you have to make sure you have both, because if you don't have both, you have none.
You have none. I hear you. And I just love the work that we did with the CSE track, or the Comprehensive Sexuality Education track, and brought to light so many topics, including pleasure, which was my favorite.
Right? Pleasure-based approach.
Very important. I hate how it's always left out. I mean, when I was traveling for the International Conference on Family Planning, a certain group of people tried to censor my presentation because they thought I was going to, you know how it goes. Yeah.
When people hear a certain group
a certain group. That's a story for another day. But yeah, it's very nice that we could come together and actually bring forth topics that are really important that we need to speak about. Like you said, make information accessible, but also make it happen that young people actually push the agenda. And I want us to dig a little bit into that before we conclude. The role of young people. And we have young people here today. So let it come from you. Tell them, what do you think the role of young people is when it comes to ensuring that, comprehensive sexuality education or sexual and reproductive health and rights achieves its goal or its intent in the long run? I'll start with you, Rowan.
Yeah, I would say that what I like the most about our work, and what I like the most about how the direction of our work is going through, is that we're so determined and focused on a right-based approach to not only SRHR, but to health in general. And from that, I think the only way I can see that young people are involved and fulfilling is to lead the process. They should be on the table deciding what topics should be addressed and how it should be addressed and how young people can be reached. So I think young people should be on the table. They should be leading the discussion. They should be evaluating the outcomes of comprehensive sexuality education, because that all cannot be done without involving them from the start to the finish throughout the whole cycle of SRHR, which I think, as I mentioned before, it starts from even before birth to even after death. So we cannot have that kind of conversation while excluding young people and looking at them as beneficiaries or people who are recipients of the information, not people who are leading the knowledge, creating the knowledge, and distributing the knowledge as well. So I think we also need to kind of discuss the power dynamics that also come in place when we are talking about CSE, sexuality, and just SRHR, and evaluate where young people specifically fall into place when we have those kind of information. What is meaningful youth participation when we come to SRHR or sexual and reproductive health and rights? It's all very hard topics, but it needs to always be addressed.
Yeah, I hear you. Meaningful youth participation, and we have a youth engagement expert on the table.
Yeah, of course I want to say something
about
what
Kevin, share.
Aran, I totally agree with you. And I think the best SRHR education comes from peers. So I think that's something we have to, of course, look at. But something that's really important is also the youth-adult partnerships. I think, as young people, we can do so much, but we can never reach 100% without working with the older generation, and they have to be open to work with us. So I think it's quite important for that the youth adult partnership to be a big thing within SRHR, because adults are never gonna reach their full potential. Young people are never gonna reach their full potential, but together we can finally achieve good SRHR and CSE, of course.
Perfect, guys. I love this. This is very interesting, and I think that we need to have continuous discussions, but also be very deliberate in action. Yeah, and sexual and reproductive health and rights again is part of us. It should not really be something we work towards to in isolation, but rather make it part of the cycle of each and everything that we do if we really want to achieve sustainable development. Yeah. Amazing, guys. This was great. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation.
That was fun. Thank you so much.
It was fun, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah, and thank you so much to everyone that listened in. Once again, this was Hello, Future Speaking, and I think we heard the future speaking from the young people themselves.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.